Well, hello, everybody. I am Kari the Mortician, and we are back for round two, segment two of That's Naughty, calling out funeral directors, cemetery personnel, people that work in the funeral business that are naughty. And as many of you have said, naughty is not quite the biggest term that we could use here, but just for fun, we're using that term to define some of these horrible people that are doing vile crimes against some of the most innocent, people who can't defend themselves, like deceased children, animals, all of it. So let's dive in. Number one is the Burr Oak Cemetery in Alsip, Illinois. And I learned about this one when I was researching the story for Emmett Till, as we talked about over on the Victims of Crime video. Emmett Till, he was buried in this cemetery. This does not affect him. He was not one of the victims of this crime. But what happened? So prosecutors say the scheme was orchestrated by the cemetery's director, Carolyn Towns. And it began because they thought, oh no, we're getting overcrowded. We need to figure out a way to continue making money from people by using the cemetery space. So prosecutors contend that Keith Nix, who is the cemetery grounds foreman, directed his brother and Daly, another worker, to illegally double stack graves. So they were burying people on top of other people without knowing, and throwing human remains on a mound of debris in the back of the cemetery. 200 to 300 bodies were dug up and dumped into an isolated, weeded area of the cemetery. Now, this is where many prominent African Americans are buried, including Emmett Till. Former cemetery manager Carolyn Towns, foreman Keith Nix, and dump truck operator Terrence Nix, all of Chicago, and also backhoe operator Maurice Daly of Illinois, were each charged with one count of dismembering a human body. They all face up to 30 years in prison. Someone reported and said that they believe the alleged scheme had been going on for about 4 years. The disinterred graves appeared to be older, neglected ones, which is probably why they chose them, because then maybe nobody would visit, nobody would notice that their bodies had been moved, because nobody was looking after their loved one in that grave. However, they were found out, and Carolyn, Keith, Terrence, and Maurice, that is super naughty. Now, number two, the Springfield, Illinois stolen pre-need money. William B.J. Elias, who is a 51-year-old funeral director, turned himself in to the police after LaSalle County authorities issued a warrant for his arrest. He was charged with 14 counts of violating the Illinois Funeral Funds or Burial Act and theft. All of the charges are felonies. So pre-need funds ended up missing from Elias Funeral Home in Streator, and they were reported. The Illinois Office of Comptroller, Streator Police, and the LaSalle County State Attorney led the investigation. So they identified 31 individual victims who he had taken money from when they gave his funeral home money to fund a funeral home ahead of time. And instead of funding, he just kept the money. So that money was not there when they went to use it. So they say $136,000 in pre-need funds between 2003 and 2019 were stolen. Elias's state money was given to the funeral home, never placed in insurance, and was used by himself. His funeral director license was revoked in October of 2019 by the Illinois Department of Professional and Financial Regulation. The funeral home pre-need license was revoked as well in 2019, meaning the business could no longer accept prepayment for funeral arrangements. Stealing from people is horrible when it comes to this, especially because you're being trusted with sometimes the only finances that some people have. So William v. Elias, that's naughty. Number 3, Billy Wilks. Now we're going back to the 80s for this one. In Robertson County, Tennessee. So back in the late 80s, while Wilks was the owner of Barber Funeral Home in Robertson County, the funeral home actually closed in 1988. He faced numerous charges, including fraud, after it was discovered that he had buried people without burial vaults or even caskets that had been paid for. So an investigation into the situation turned up numerous instances of people buried without their vault or casket. During some of the disinterments, they even found that trash from the funeral home had been buried with the deceased. So not only did they not get their caskets and vaults, but they took trash from around the funeral home and buried it with the people. Like insult to injury. Some people had been buried simply body with nothing at all. One body had been wrapped in a piece of indoor-outdoor carpet. And you may wonder how he was caught for these actions after this time. Well, Donald Flatt, a family member of one of the deceased, hid in a church, it's reported, and he watched while Wilks buried a relative without the vault that had been purchased. So when the grave of Danny Ray Pith was exhumed, authorities found dirty diapers, an apple core, dog food cans, a vacuum cleaner bag full of dirt, all in the casket along with the body. Neighboring mortician Al Jesse of Robertson County told the board he had exhumed several of the graves and could not believe what he had saw. He said graves were filled with trash, and one deceased was buried just 18 inches deep. That's like only this far below the surface. That's not okay. Justice said he knew Wilks and considered his funeral home a shotgun, happy-go-lucky operation. He said Wilks once transported a body in the back of a Volkswagen bus because he said the weather was too bad to drive his hearse. In the end, Bobby Wilks, that is naughty. So before the case made it to trial, this kind of has a part 2 for it. Mr. Wilks pled guilty and was sentenced to 27 years, 11 months, and 29 days in prison. Now, here's where the story gets naughtier, as if that's possible. So after Wilks was in the prison system, he was placed in charge of the children's nursery. Who made that move? The nursery was for the children of visitors during prisoner visitations. Prison nurseries were often staffed by inmates. But while working in the nursery, Wilks was accused of molesting children who were in the care of that nursery and was convicted. So not only, Bobby Wilks, are you naughty, but you are just disgusting. Number 4, Good Shepherds Memorial Park in Pennsylvania. Now, many of you have sent this one to me because this is a very well-known case of a mausoleum being abandoned and a huge concern for the deceased who are interred or entombed at this mausoleum. So the Good Faith Cemetery was a mausoleum that was built of reinforced concrete, granite, and Italian marble in 1976 by Westminster Associates. Ownership was transferred to Larry Deminsky, who incorporated the cemetery as the Westminster Memorial Garden in 1983. The property was donated to a church, although the transfer of the land was never officially recorded. So fast forward, this property was then sold and purchased by Viktoria Evstafieva. We're going to just guess on that pronunciation. And she said, along with her business partner, we did not purchase the business part of it. We do not intend to continue this place as a cemetery. So they sued in 2017 Luzerne County, claiming that they bought the property at a tax sale and that they didn't know it was a cemetery. But the courts ruled that they should have known they were purchasing a cemetery. Who purchases something and never visits it? And if you visited that property, you would obviously see the mausoleums and the fact that it was a cemetery. So it costs anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 to remove remains from a cemetery, according to this article. Several families have considered filing lawsuits against those owners to force them to take action. So in 2015, it had been condemned because of absentee owners and a lack of maintenance. So this went on for several years. It is still a battle today. It is still something going on. These people are still not taking ownership and taking care of this property. So Chris Yanaitis of the Yanaitis Funeral Home has made it his mission to remove bodies from the mausoleum, not charging anything or taking any profit for his funeral home. He's been able to keep the costs around $3,000 for each family that he's helping for the court action removal and cremation that occurs after they do this for each past funeral home client. So since 2014, Yanaitis has been able to remove 15 individuals. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but Chris, awesome work. You are a great funeral director for stepping in and helping. However, Viktoria, you're naughty and you kind of just suck for not stepping up. Man. Number 5. Tom Clark in Whitehall Funeral Home in Michigan. So over in my stomping grounds here, guys. So Whitehall Funeral Director Thomas Claude Clark has been charged with felonies for allegedly performing services without a license and burying at least one empty urn at a funeral, misleading the family, thinking it had their loved one's cremated remains in it. How can you stand there at a cemetery and let somebody believe they're burying their loved one? I don't understand this. He faced another fraud charge after a container intended for the cremated remains of a baby was found empty. The investigation started with the discovery of a frozen body in the back of Clark's van after an arrest in January for drunken driving. We see this often where someone has all these criminal actions going on and it's something totally unrelated, like a drunk driving charge or petty theft, or, someone breaks into their house. And then when the police come to investigate, they find that they're actually they're actually a criminal. So it's often some of these other side things that get people caught, which is good, but, wish people were getting caught more when they're doing naughty things. So he got caught because he got this drunk driving arrest and they found a body in the back of the van. So he was supposed to have buried sweet 86-year-old Helen Anthony's cremated remains at Fruitland Township Cemetery, but her urn was empty because she's frozen in the back of a van. Clark was also supposed to have buried the cremated remains of 5-month-old Ryan Zach at the same cemetery. His urn was also empty. Muskegon County Sheriff told News 8 in March there was no way of telling how many empty urns Clark may have buried over the course of his career. So Tom Clark, that's super naughty. Now, number 6. We've got finally a little necrophilia, which you guys have sent me different stories about this. Kenneth Douglas, who worked the night shift at the Hamilton County Morgue from 1976 until 1992. It's a long time to be doing this. Said in a deposition, he had sex with up to 100 dead bodies while drunk or high on drugs. WCPO Cincinnati reported, he said, I would just get on top of them and pull my pants down. Gross. A key piece of evidence was Douglas's wife's testimony when she called to report her husband coming home from work smelling like sex and alcohol. But she was told by some of her supervisors, as she quoted, whatever happens on county property in county time is county business. So was she trying to report it and nobody was listening, possibly for a time? So he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole in March of 2016. But how did this go on for so long? And then he was finally caught. So one of the bodies that he had raped was actually part of a murder investigation. And they went back and they had to test that body for DNA evidence on her. Well, in the process of the court case, his DNA came up, his semen. And obviously that was a huge red flag because her death was already attributed to somebody else. So why was his semen found on her body? The whole thing kind of just blew on up and they found out what was going on. And so he was sent to life in prison. So Kenneth Douglas, you are, naughty guys is not even a big enough word for this one. You're just vile, 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 gross. Now, number 7 kind of clicks all the boxes of naughtiness because, like I had said in the beginning, it taps into all of the defenseless people that you can possibly take action against. So Nigel Robinson-Wright, who is a funeral director in the UK, had extreme pornographic images of bodies that they found on him, as well as photos of himself abusing a dog. He's charged with arranging or facilitating the commission of a child sex offense, 3 counts of possessing indecent images of a child, and possessing extreme pornography. I can't find a lot about this case, but just the final result here is enough to know that he needs to go into the deepest, darkest hole that exists and just stay there. Nigel Robinson-Wright of Chain Lane Staining is also accused of trying to arrange the sexual abuse of a toddler girl and having images of himself having sex with a dog. Like, these are just ridiculous. Like, oh, what a disgusting human, right? Hands up, disgusting human. So Nigel Robinson-Wright, you are naughty, doesn't even begin to cover it. You are disgusting. Just go away. So these are 7 more funeral director, cemetery personnel, deathcare world, naughty events. You guys have done such a great job sending me stories and articles. So send me enough and we'll come up with a part 3 of That's Naughty within the funeral business. Thanks, everyone.